Okay, this is Ben Langston with the final presentation for CIT 260. The first thing we'll do is take a look at static variables versus non-static variables. Um, so this is just a quick look at a static variable, and it is an integer that is grain price, and we've set it to equal 12. The static modifier means that this constant could be used without having to create a new object for the class. So a static variable is a single memory location. So you can access it directly without having to call an instance of the class. And when it's changed, if we happen to change this value, it'll change across all class object instances. Non-static, so this is from my game model class. We have a private double called bushels per acre harvested. So in a non-static, it represents a different memory location for each instance of the class. So when we use them, we have to create an instance of the class, and any changes will be only in the class object instance where it's defined. So here we call in the game class and assign it to a game variable. So game equals new game. And if we've already created the game, then we could call it in like this and assign it. And then to set the value of this variable, you would just type game dot set bushels per acres. And then later on, if you needed to pull that value, you could assign it to a double variable name and then get bushels per acre harvested. So calling a static function, a static method belongs to the class. So this is the function, public static double, calculate bushels to feed the population, and with a couple of variables, and then the meat of that. And to call that, you just have to put in the where it's at. So you put in the class that the function is sending in, you call it, and you're done. You don't need to create an instance of it, of an object. On the other hand, when you call a non-static function, so this is, we want to display our inventory item. So game equals never sync get the current game, and then we've called in an instance of that object. So we've had to do that, and then we have game get inventory, and the rest of the code. But the point is, you've got to create an object instance to use a non-static variable and then get the values from it that way. So a non-static method belongs to the object of a class. You have to make an object for it and then call it. So on to arrays. So when to use a different, just a different list. So an array, so it's used when the length of the list can be fixed. It's used when the items need to be dynamically altered, and it's used when the data types of the list are the same. An array list is used when the list needs to be varying length, and used when the list items are different types of objects or data types. And an enum is used when the items in the list are constant, so they'll never change. It's used when the list items are a fixed length, and it's used when the list items are the same data type. So we'll look at three examples real quick. So here's an example from the code of an array. This is the function that is called to create the array, and it has the single bracket, and this is going to be a new item inventory, an array of 16 values. So we've defined how long we want that. And then this is the code to basically set different values of that array, and it happens 16 times. I'm not going to list it 16 times. That's why the dots are there. But this defines the array. It's fixed, and you would use it. You could call from it. You can alter the items in it, but you can't go any more than 16th. You'll have an out of bounds exception. Next is an array list. So within my game class, I created an array list called string, or called backpack. And then within my item inventory view, I called that array list, and it is get game, get player, get backpack. And then I can add to that array list. And the neat thing about an array list is it's kind of like a shopping bag. You walk around the store and you can just keep putting things in it. And then if you won't use them up, you can just remove them. So it's very versatile in when you don't know, you might have 100 things you need to throw in it, and you don't have to set that length. And an enum is just a simple list. So here's a simple enum of item type. These are the different items that are in this particular class. And it can also be a little more complicated. And this is my actors. And you can set values for name, description, and column and row. And it will pull, when you use them, you'll be able to pull these out based on name, description, column, and row if you wanted to. Um, enum is good when you don't need to change any of this. This is just something sitting there that you need to go grab and put in your code for information, or make a list of items to buy. So as long as you don't need it to add or subtract from there, you can use an enum class. And then basically when you pull it in, you can use an array list, or you can use an array to pull them in and create the list. But this is really just some constants that you can use. Okay, so this is for a basic for loop. For this the array of locations, we go ahead and pull in the get locations to retrieve the locations from the map. And this is just building the map itself. But here's the actual basic for loop. So for the integer of column equals 0. This integer column equals 0 basically initializes this. This is really the meat of it. What is it going to do? So as long as column is less than, so as long as 0 is less than location's length, then we're going to go through the meat of this for loop. And I'll go to the code to show exactly what that's going to do. And then each time it does it, the column's going to add each time. So it'll go through this loop until this condition is met, that columns, which has been initialized to 0, is going to keep growing until it matches, is greater than this, and then it'll stop the loop. So what does that look like? And this is where that one actually comes from. And this is just going through this, and as long as this condition is true, it's going to build this piece of the map. And then we can drop down here and see a little more intense one. And this is going to build the map itself. This is building the border. And again, you initialize your variable to 0 when your row is less than your location's length. So this dot length basically is telling it the entire length of the array. So it's a 5 by 5 array. So for the rows, it's going to have 5 different locations, 0 through 4 basically. Got to remember with arrays that the indexes start with 0. So that's always a little tricky. And then we increment it by 1 by going row plus plus. And for this particular for loop, we're going to go through this entire bit of code, and there's some if-else statements going on here that are going to make different things happen for each location. So it's going to go through this basically 25 times, because you've got a for loop for the row, you've got a for loop for the column. So you're going to go through this and build your map based on this little array. So this little bit of code builds that map that is kind of cool. So now we're going to demonstrate examples of code that you've written for one of the individual assignments for understanding how to throw, propagate, and catch custom runtime errors in your program. So this is from a view, and this is try and catch. So try and catch to me is kind of like, let's try this, and if it works, that's great, but if something happens, we're going to come back with this exception, and we're going to catch it. So it's kind of like, if this works, that's great, but if it doesn't, then we're going to get this. And then we'll return back to try again, basically. So what are we trying to catch here? So if we pass in this function, which was initialized outside of this try block, because if you try to initialize it inside, it's trapped in there. So you have to initialize it outside, which we kind of learned as we went. Send it a couple variables. So on the other side of it, we have the function and some conditions that we're trying to meet. Um, so if the wheat to feed is less than 0, so if somebody enters a negative number trying to be funny in the game, I don't know why you try to, you know, feed the people a negative number, but it's possible. So we're going to throw a new crop exception. So this is going to be the message that comes up when this condition is met um, in this statement. And then another one. So if we can get past these two, we won't have to worry about any messages coming up. But if we do, then we'll have a an error. So one other thing I want to mention while I'm talking about the runtime errors is I want to flip over to the code real quick and go to the main class. And the other thing that we do with try and catch is we also have a finally piece, which we didn't use too much, but it's there if we need it. So we have a finally that runs through, and this is when we're closing out all our buffer files and log files. We don't leave those open, so we close them out as if they're not null, basically. And this is supposed to run regardless of whether anything is, if there's any errors. And you can put a stack trace after this if you want to, but then you have a bunch of red lines in code that you really don't want to see when you're closing out your game. So I moved it to the final catch, which is really hard to throw. But if it does get thrown, then it's right there. So character stream, why should we use a character stream versus a byte stream to read and write data to a file? So when and why to use a character stream? So character streams allow you to read and write character data regardless of the format data. It supports characters in ASCII2 and Unicode format. Java recommends using character streams for reading and writing all character data. Really, this is when you're working with pure text. I think when we're trying to output we did the tool report was part of my individual assignment, which I'll show in a second, of how that writes out to a file, and it's pure text, so you can open it up and read it as a log file. We have a log file that catches errors also, and so those two files can be opened up and actually read. If you're reading out in bytes, so byte streams are usually used to read and write binary data to another process or to another process on the same machine or across the network. You cannot access byte file stream to read and write Unicode because the byte streams can only read and write 1 byte of data at a time. And so an example of when we use the byte stream is when we're saving the game. So I'm going to go flip to the tool report real quick. Okay, so tool report, and this is just a function that is going to output the tool report. And it is going to, we pull in the tools in the tool array. And this tools is pulling the enum of items, basically. And then we set up some formatting so it looks good when we put it out. So all this has different meanings. And then you go through the for loop, the for each loop. And as you go through it, we're going to pull out the item type, we're going to pull out the quantity in stock, and we're going to pull out the item price. So what happens when you do that, which we'll go ahead and quickly demo, reports. So we are going to go ahead and view and print the tools. So we'll put a T there. And I set mine up so it would also print on the screen. And then a file location. So we'll call it file final. And I set it up so if I don't put a txt on there, it'll add it for me. So I'm just going to put final and hit enter. and my report's been created. So if I go ahead and flip over to my Finder, I see final. And although it didn't add the TXT for me like I thought it would, I still have a text file that I can read. So this is an example of um, character stream and why it's important, because if I'd saved this as a byte stream, it would not be readable. So very useful. And walk through an example of code you've written for one of your individual assignments and demonstrate your understanding of how to write character data to an external file. I think I just did that, so I actually got ahead of my self, but that was that example. And that brings us to demonstrating the fully implemented game. So I'm going to stop the recording and kind of get set up to do that, and I'll be back. Start a new game, map, and since I know by going to the game last time, I'm going to go visit the animal doctor and see what he has to say. So the animal doctor's at 2-1, and Lehi's here, so that's cool. So who's the firstborn son of the brother of Jared? Well, we'll go with number 3. And so sickness will prevail without the right choice. I need to purchase an item to defend against the enemies in the orchard. So I'm going to go ahead and change locations. And I think I need to go to the store. So 0, 2. And we'll go ahead and buy an item. And I see that there's something for sickness here called anti-plague. I'm going to go ahead and buy one of those. And that cost me a little bit, 100 bushels of wheat. I think while I'm still here, I know that I'm going to need some grain, which I would find out if I visited the judge, but to keep this shorter than taking forever, we'll go ahead and get our grain while we're here. And now we're going to go ahead and move the locations. We'll go to 4-4, and now the anti-plague in the backpack has saved the city from Corridor's treachery, and now I need to go to the temple, but first I need to go to the library to unlock it. So right now you see the temple's still unlocked, and we'll go to the library, which is 2-2, and the library has given me the opportunity to unlock the temple, and I've been told to go visit the farm to unlock the wheat field, and that I'm going to need something, which I know is grain. So just to save a step there, I already grabbed it. So first we'll go to the temple, because if I don't go to the temple, I'm going to get all my people are starting to get killed when I start going somewhere. And now the Lord has blessed me by eliminating the armies of Laman and Lamanal. Otherwise, every time I visit different locations, I'll lose 10 of my population. I need those folks. So now we're going to go ahead and move to the farmer, who's at 2-0. And the farmer is here. He's happy. He unlocked the wheat field because I brought him some grain. So now we're going to go to the wheat field. Then we're going to go back. And now, since I've got this set up to only go through 2-year cycle, this should end the game. And it does. So this is our annual report. Shows us we made it to year 3. 38 people starved. Have 75 left. Current wheat. And now I have a high score. And I've made this high score persistent. I've also made this so you can quit at this point, or you can return to the main menu. So we'll go back to the main menu. We see that this is still here. If I quit, and then we hit restart again, start completely over, start a new game, that high score is still here. And this is the high score I had from earlier, actually. Okay, that's my game demo. Thank you.